What if you remembered absolutely everything you've ever lived through? Every conversation, every face, every word spoken, every emotion felt, every seemingly insignificant detail of your past, all stored with almost perfect precision, as if your own life were recorded in high definition inside your brain. Not just big moments but also ordinary days, mundane situations, dates you never tried to memorize. Now stop for a second and imagine this happening effortlessly, without practice, without choice. Scary? Or fascinating? Have you ever experienced this, trying to remember something simple from the past and realizing that your mind filled in gaps, distorted facts, or simply erased entire parts of the story? Well, know that there are people for whom this simply doesn't happen. For most of us, memory is selective, flawed, and deeply emotional. The brain chooses what to keep and what to leave behind. We forget names, dates, appointments, details of important conversations, and even significant moments in our own lives. And, curiously, this is considered normal, healthy, and even necessary for mental balance. But what if your brain didn't have this filter? What if it refused to forget? What you are about to discover may surprise you, because this is not a science fiction script or a movie plot. We are talking about a real, rare, and deeply intriguing phenomenon of the human brain: hyperthymesia, also known as highly superior autobiographical memory. People with hyperthymesia possess an extraordinary ability to remember virtually every event in their lives with a level of detail that defies common logic. They can say exactly what they did on a specific date years ago, what day of the week it was, what the weather was like, what they were wearing, how they felt emotionally, and even the thoughts that crossed their minds at that moment. It's not just about remembering important facts, but about reliving the past as if it had never truly gone away. It's as if time, for these people, doesn't move forward in the same way it does for the rest of humanity. Stay with me until the end, because understanding this completely changes how you see memory, forgetting, and even your own identity. Perhaps you're thinking this sounds like a superpower, something enviable, almost superhuman. After all, who hasn't wished for a perfect memory? Who hasn't wanted to remember everything they studied, all the important conversations or special moments that now seem blurry? But science shows that the human brain is much more complex and cruel than we imagine. Hyperthymesia isn't necessarily linked to genius, above-average intelligence, or traditional photographic memory. We're talking about something different, deeply connected to how the brain organizes, accesses, and relives personal experiences. And here arises a disturbing question. If remembering everything seems incredible, why do so few people possess this ability? Is forgetfulness not a flaw, but rather a protective mechanism? Is erasing parts of the past actually essential to moving forward? Think for a moment about difficult moments in your life, losses, disappointments, mistakes, situations you would rather not relive. Now imagine if these memories surfaced with the same emotional intensity as when they happened, every day without warning. Had you ever thought about it that way? Hyperthymesia challenges everything we believe we know about memory, identity, and consciousness. It raises profound questions about who we are, how the brain constructs our perception of reality, and even why we forget. By studying these individuals, scientists have begun to realize that forgetting can be as important as remembering. And the deeper we delve into this mystery, the clearer it becomes that the human brain holds secrets we are still far from fully understanding. Now, as we move forward, you will discover how this phenomenon works, what happens inside the brains of these people, and why what seems like a gift can carry a hidden price. And it is precisely here that the mystery begins to deepen. And while you listen to all this, perhaps something inside you has already been awakened. Maybe you remembered someone who seems to never forget anything, or maybe you thought about how your own memory works, what has been stored and what has been lost over time. If this topic resonates with you, leave a comment below about what has touched you the most so far. Would you feel comfortable remembering absolutely everything, or do you believe that forgetting is also a way of moving forward? Your experience, your perception, and even your doubts help to give even more depth to this conversation, because this channel isn't just about science, it's about how science connects with our real lives. If this topic is already resonating with you, liking this video is a simple yet powerful way to show that this type of content needs to continue existing. Each like helps the video reach more people who are also interested in the mysteries of the human brain, scientific curiosities, and phenomena that challenge everything we think we know about the mind. When you interact, the algorithm understands that this message matters. If you feel you enjoy this type of reflection, this deep dive into the workings of the brain and the less obvious aspects of the human mind, subscribing to the channel is like saying, I want to continue exploring this. That's how this community grows, that's how new videos like this gain traction, and that's how we can delve deeper into topics that are rarely explained in this way. Your participation here truly makes a difference. It strengthens the channel, broadens the reach of the content, and creates a space where curiosity, science, and questioning go hand in hand. And now that this conversation is just beginning, it's worth staying with me because what comes next reveals even more surprising layers of this phenomenon that challenges how we understand human memory. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because understanding what hyperthymesia is requires going beyond the simplistic idea of good memory or bad memory. Hyperthymesia, also called highly superior autobiographical memory, is an extremely rare condition in which a person can remember events from their own life with extreme precision, without conscious effort, without memorization techniques, and without deliberate training. We are not talking about memorizing numbers, texts, or images as in memory competitions, but about something much more intimate and profound, the continuous and vivid recollection of one's own personal history. For those who live with hyperthymesia, the past is not a distant archive that needs to be accessed with difficulty. It is always available, almost like a constant flow that runs through the present. Common dates, like any Tuesday from years ago, are not lost in time. They remain associated with emotions, smells, thoughts, small decisions made that day, and even physical sensations. It's as if the mind had an extremely organized internal record, capable of reconstructing experiences with a fidelity that impresses even the scientists themselves. What's most intriguing is that these memories don't just surface when a person wants them to. Often they appear automatically, triggered by a sound, a word, an image, or even a seemingly neutral sensation. This functioning reveals a hidden truth about the human brain. Memory is not just a repository of information, but a living, emotional system deeply connected to identity. In the case of hyperthymesia, this system seems to operate without the filters that normally limit access to the past. For a long time, it was believed that people with this type of memory would have some kind of generalized cognitive advantage. But studies show something curious. They don't necessarily excel in intelligence tests, they don't learn faster than other people, and they don't possess photographic memory in the classical sense. The difference lies in autobiographical memory, the kind that constructs the narrative of who we are. This completely changes how we understand the impact of memory on mentality, decisions, and the individual journey of each human being. While most people reconstruct the past in a fragmented way, filling in gaps with interpretations, assumptions, and even unconscious inventions, those with hyperthymesia access these memories with a sense of almost absolute certainty. For them, what happened is what happened, with less room for distortions. This raises a fascinating point. Is our identity shaped precisely by the flaws in our memory? Is forgetting also a form of emotional and psychological transformation? The human brain normally selects what will be remembered and what will be discarded. This process is invisible, silent, and happens all the time. It protects, reorganizes, softens painful experiences, and often alters details so that we can move on. Hyperthymesia seems to operate behind the scenes according to a different logic. It's as if the brains of these people have difficulty switching off this recording mechanism, keeping alive memories that, for most, would naturally fade over time. This doesn't mean that these people are consciously trapped in the past, but the past is always there, available, influencing perceptions, emotional reactions, and even everyday choices. Every decision made in the present can carry the weight of hundreds of perfectly remembered past experiences. The impact of this on how one feels, thinks, and reacts to the world is profound, and often invisible to an outside observer. Another aspect that makes hyperthymesia so mysterious is the fact that it cannot simply be taught or trained. There is no proven method for developing this type of autobiographical memory. This reinforces the idea that we are dealing with a specific neurological condition, linked to how certain areas of the brain communicate and organize themselves. Even so, despite imaging exams and detailed studies, science continues to try to decipher exactly what differentiates these brains from others. When we look at this phenomenon more closely, we realize that it reveals something even greater about the human experience. Memory serves not only to recall facts, but to construct meaning. It influences how we interpret the present, how we anticipate the future, and how we deal with complex emotions. In the case of hyperthymesia, this construction occurs with a much more abundant and detailed raw material, which can make the emotional journey intense, profound, and at times difficult to manage. There is a very fine line between remembering and reliving. And it is precisely on this boundary that hyperthymesia becomes so fascinating and, at the same time, so challenging. Each memory brings with it not only images but feelings, mental states, and perceptions that can manifest as if they were happening again. This completely changes the relationship with time and with the very notion of the past. By understanding what hyperthymesia is, we begin to question something we almost never stop to think about: Perhaps forgetting is not a defect of the brain, but an essential function for emotional balance. Perhaps the human mind needs to let go in order to continue moving forward. And when this function doesn't happen in the usual way, phenomena arise that force us to reconsider everything we believe we know about memory, identity, and consciousness. And as this understanding deepens, it becomes impossible not to want to take a closer look at what really happens inside the brains of these people, how these memories are organized, and what revelations science has begun to uncover by investigating this unusual functioning, because that's where the mystery begins to take on even more surprising contours. Comment below, that makes sense to me. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject because to understand how these people manage to remember everything, it's necessary to go behind the scenes of the human brain and abandon the simplistic idea that hyperthymesia is just extremely good memory. What happens here is much more complex and involves a different way of organizing, connecting, and accessing memories. It's not about storing more information, but about how the brain builds pathways to revisit it with unusual precision. At the heart of this phenomenon is the hippocampus, a structure fundamental to the formation and consolidation of memories. In people with hyperthymesia, neuroimaging studies suggest that the hippocampus exhibits patterns of activity and connectivity that differ from the norm. It seems to function as an extremely efficient archivist, not only recording events but indexing each experience with multiple layers of context. Date, location, emotion, mental state, everything is associated as if it were part of a single, inseparable package. This means that a memory never comes alone, but accompanied by the entire lived experience. At the same time, the prefrontal cortex, an area linked to decision-making, planning, and cognitive control, also plays an important role in this process. Normally, this region helps filter what deserves to be accessed and what can remain dormant in memory. In brains with hyperthymesia, this filter seems to work differently. Access to autobiographical memories occurs with fewer blockages, fewer layers of protection. The result is a more direct, more spontaneous flow of memories, and often impossible to interrupt. This dynamic reveals a hidden truth about how the mind works. Remembering is not a passive act. Every time we access a memory, the brain reconstructs it. It reorganizes details, updates emotions, and, in many cases, alters the original content without us realizing it. In hyperthymesia, this reconstruction process seems to preserve far more elements of the original experience, reducing common distortions. It's as if the brains of these people have a greater resistance to the natural transformation of memories over time. Another fascinating point is how external stimuli act as triggers. A specific smell, an old song, a phrase spoken at random, or even a bodily sensation can activate an entire chain of autobiographical memories. This happens because the brain works by association, and in the case of hyperthymesia, these associations are extremely dense. Each lived experience connects to countless others, creating a complex network that sustains this almost unlimited access to the past. But this efficiency has a profound impact on mindset. If every decision made today is influenced by a vast amount of perfectly remembered past experiences, the emotional weight of those choices can be much greater. The brain not only consults the history, it relives that history. This can bring clarity, but it can also generate overload. The mental journey of these people is no longer lighter, it is more intense. From a scientific standpoint, there is still much debate about what comes first, brain structure or behavior. Some researchers believe that hyperthymesia arises from a specific neurological predisposition, while others argue that certain mental patterns, such as the tendency to frequently revisit the past, end up shaping the brain over time. Probably, the truth lies somewhere between these two explanations, showing once again how brain and behavior are in constant mutual transformation. What becomes clear is that hyperthymesia doesn't function like a switch that can be turned on or off. These people don't choose to remember, they simply remember. The brain operates behind the scenes, bringing to light information that would be inaccessible to most. This completely changes the relationship with time. The past ceases to be something distant and begins to coexist with the present, influencing emotions, reactions, and even how the future is imagined. This functioning also challenges the idea that the human brain always seeks energy efficiency. Maintaining so many active memories demands resources, attention, and mental energy. This reinforces the hypothesis that forgetting is not an evolutionary error, but a sophisticated strategy to reduce the emotional and cognitive impact of accumulating experiences. When this strategy does not operate as usual, phenomena such as hyperthymesia arise, forcing us to rethink the balance between remembering and moving on. Upon closer observation of this phenomenon, we begin to realize that memory is not merely an archive of the past, but a central element in the construction of identity. Who we are today depends directly on what we can remember and, perhaps even more so, on what we can forget. Hyperthymesia exposes this relationship in a raw, unfiltered way, revealing how the brain shapes our perception of reality based on accumulated experiences. The more science investigates these connections between the hippocampus, prefrontal cortex, and emotional networks, the more revelations emerge about the profound impact of memory on human consciousness. It's not just a rare phenomenon, but a window into understanding how the mind organizes time, meaning, and the very notion of self. And it is precisely by looking at these internal mechanisms that we begin to approach an even more uncomfortable and fascinating understanding of the price of never forgetting. Write this down, I'm on this journey too. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because it's when we look at real-life cases that hyperthymesia ceases to be just a distant scientific concept and begins to take on a face, a history, and an emotional impact. It was precisely by hearing extremely specific and consistent accounts that scientists realized they were facing something that couldn't be explained as coincidence, exaggeration, or simple talent for remembering. Some of these people can answer questions that, for any other brain, would be virtually impossible to access without external records. There are individuals who, when asked about a random date in their adult lives, can immediately recall what they were doing that day, where they were, who they were talking to, what clothes they were wearing, what the weather was like, and, most importantly, how they were feeling at that moment. It's not a vague memory or one painstakingly reconstructed. The answer comes quickly, almost automatically, accompanied by emotional certainty, as if the event had happened recently. For researchers, this was a watershed moment, because these answers not only seemed accurate, but could also be corroborated by diaries, news from the time, weather records, and accounts from other people. One of the best-known cases involves a woman who, over the years, participated in various scientific tests. Researchers cited completely random dates, with no direct relation to important events, and she described the day with an impressive level of detail. On many occasions, she herself was surprised to realize that she didn't need to think to remember. The memories simply came, laden with emotion, mental images, and physical sensations. This type of account began to reveal a hidden truth. These people don't access the past like opening a drawer, but like walking through a door. Another aspect that caught the scientists' attention was the consistency of these accounts over time. The same questions asked months or years later generated virtually identical answers, something rare even in people with excellent memories. This reinforced the idea that hyperthymesia involves not only a good capacity for recall, but a unique way of storing and retrieving autobiographical experiences. The past of these people seems less subject to the natural transformations that occur in the memory of most of us. Some cases have also revealed a curious detail. Many of these people can automatically identify the day of the week for any date in their adult lives. They don't do mental calculations, they don't resort to conscious strategies. The information is simply there. For scientists, this indicates that autobiographical memory is deeply integrated into the brain's temporal systems, creating an extremely solid internal timeline. This organization gives memories an almost permanent chronological structure. But what is perhaps most impactful in these accounts is not just the factual accuracy, but the associated emotional charge. When these people describe an event, they frequently relive the emotional state of that moment. Joy, frustration, anxiety, enthusiasm, everything returns with force. This makes it clear that hyperthymesia is not neutral. It shapes mindset, influences present decisions, and alters how these people relate to their own past. In interviews, some women report that negative memories do not lose intensity over time. Old arguments, painful losses, and embarrassing situations remain as vivid as the day they happened. This has a profound impact on the emotional journey because the brain does not offer the same detachment that most people develop naturally. For scientists, this point was essential in understanding that hyperthymesia cannot be seen merely as an extraordinary gift, but as a condition with real consequences for psychological well-being. These real-life cases also helped to dispel the idea of fraud or exaggeration. The tests were rigorous, repeated, and cross-referenced with external data. The more the researchers investigated, the more evident it became that something different was happening behind the scenes in these people's brains. Their memory did not function under the same known rules. And this opened up space for new questions about mental transformation, emotional adaptation, and the true role of forgetting in the human experience. The scientific fascination grows precisely because these reports are not isolated. Although extremely rare, they follow similar patterns, suggesting that hyperthymesia is a legitimate, documented, and profoundly revealing phenomenon. Each new story adds a piece to this complex puzzle, showing that human memory can take on forms far beyond what we learn in books. And the more we delve into these true stories, the more evident it becomes that remembering everything doesn't just mean having access to the past, but carrying that past constantly present, silently and continuously influencing thoughts, emotions, and choices. It is at this point that the fascination begins to share space with a deeper reflection on the emotional cost of this ability, because when the brain doesn't forget, it also doesn't allow certain experiences to simply be left behind, and it is precisely there that this phenomenon begins to reveal an even more complex and delicate side. Comment below, that makes sense to me. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because it is precisely here that hyperthymesia ceases to seem merely a fascinating phenomenon and begins to reveal a much more human, delicate, and uncomfortable side. Up to now, everything may sound like an extraordinary gift, almost an enviable ability. But when we look beyond the surface, an inevitable question arises. Is remembering everything truly an emotional advantage? Or are we facing a silent burden that few people can imagine? For those who live with hyperthymesia, the past doesn't lose its power with time. It doesn't dissolve, soften, or become distant. Old pains remain accessible with the same emotional intensity as when they occurred. Traumas don't fade, mistakes aren't forgotten, losses don't transform into mere nostalgic memories. They remain alive, complete, ready to emerge at any moment. This has a profound impact on how these people feel, think, and make decisions. Imagine carrying every failure, every word spoken in the heat of an argument, every moment of shame or regret as if it happened yesterday. For most people, the brain creates a kind of emotional buffer over time. Memories lose sharpness, emotions reorganize themselves, and this allows one to move on. In hyperthymesia, this transformation process happens in a very limited way. The brain doesn't offer the same relief. It registers, stores, and returns experiences almost intact. This dynamic directly interferes with mindset. A person may become more reflective, more cautious, but also more attached to what has already happened. Each new decision goes through a vast and emotionally charged internal archive. This can generate insecurity, anxiety, and even a constant feeling of reliving chapters that should have already been closed. The emotional journey becomes more intense because the past is never truly in the past. Some reports show that people with hyperthymesia develop internal strategies to cope with this excess of memories. They try to avoid certain stimuli, music, places, or conversations that act as emotional triggers. Others describe a feeling of mental fatigue as if the brain were always active, always revisiting experiences. This reveals a hidden truth about memory. Remembering is not just accessing information, it is reliving complete emotional states. When we think about it, a powerful reflection arises. Is forgetting a flaw in the human brain or an essential protection? Perhaps forgetting is a tool for emotional survival, a way to allow transformation, growth, and adaptation. Without it, each painful experience would continue to influence the present with the same original force. Hyperthymesia exposes exactly what happens when this protective mechanism doesn't function as usual. This point completely changes how we view memory. What seemed like a superpower begins to reveal itself as a condition that requires enormous psychological effort to manage. Empathy arises naturally when we realize that these people didn't choose to remember everything. They simply can't forget. And this raises a profound question about control, identity, and mental freedom. There is also the impact on human relationships. When someone remembers past conversations, promises made, attitudes, and behaviors with absolute precision, the conflict takes on another dimension. Forgiveness can become more difficult because the brain does not allow certain emotions to dissipate. The past remains a constant reference, influencing bonds, expectations, and emotional reactions. This can affect friendships, romantic relationships, and even family ties. At the same time, this ability can bring a profound understanding of one's own history. These people know their own trajectory with rare clarity. They can identify patterns, changes in behavior, breaking points, and moments of personal transformation with an impressive level of detail. There is a potential for intense self-knowledge, but it comes with an equally intense emotional cost. The human brain seems to have been shaped to balance remembering and forgetting. This balance allows for learning without imprisonment, memory without paralysis. Hyperthymesia breaks this balance and shows us what happens behind the scenes when one of these forces overrides the other. The impact is not only neurological, it is existential. It affects how a person perceives themselves in time, how they construct meaning, and how they deal with their own history. This emotional shift forces us to question something we rarely stop to think about. Perhaps the brain's true skill isn't remembering everything, but knowing what to let go of. Perhaps forgetting is one of the most sophisticated functions of the human mind, precisely because it allows new experiences to have space to happen without being constantly compared to the past. And when we look at it from this angle, hyperthymesia ceases to be just a scientific mystery and becomes an uncomfortable mirror. It shows us how much our relationship with memory defines who we are, how we feel, and how we move forward. The more we delve into this emotional side of the phenomenon, the clearer it becomes that understanding hyperthymesia is also understanding the limits of the human mind and the price paid when those limits cease to exist in the usual way. Comment below, that makes sense to me. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because there's a very common misconception that needs to be cleared up so that hyperthymesia can be truly understood in all its complexity. When we hear about someone who remembers absolutely everything, the immediate reaction is usually to associate this ability with genius, a very high IQ, or the famous photographic memory. But the truth is quite different, and perhaps even more surprising. Hyperthymesia doesn't automatically turn someone into a genius, nor does it make that person memorize entire books, long numerical sequences, or academic content with extraordinary ease. The difference lies elsewhere. People with hyperthymesia possess an extremely superior autobiographical memory, meaning they remember their own lives, their own history with an unusual level of detail. This includes personal experiences, everyday events, emotions felt, thoughts from that moment, and the context in which everything happened. It's not a memory focused on abstract data, formulas, technical texts, or external information, but on internal experiences. This distinction completely changes how the phenomenon should be interpreted. Photographic memory, for example, is often associated with the ability to retain images, book pages, numbers, or visual objects with great precision. Even this ability, incidentally, is rare and often exaggerated by popular culture. Hyperthymesia, however, doesn't work like a camera. It functions as a continuous narrative of one's own existence. The brains of these people are not focused on flawlessly recording the external world, but on preserving their personal timeline with an impressive richness of detail. This explains why many individuals with hyperthymesia lead ordinary lives, have varied professions, and do not demonstrate extraordinary performance in traditional intellectual tasks. In intelligence tests, they usually perform within the average. In activities that require deliberate memorization, such as memorizing lists or studying for exams, they do not necessarily excel. This revelation shatters an expectation created by our own cultural mindset, which tends to associate exceptional memory with intellectual superiority. In practice, hyperthymesia reveals a hidden truth about the human brain. There are different types of memory with distinct functions, impacts, and purposes. Autobiographical memory doesn't serve to accumulate technical knowledge, but to build identity, meaning, and emotional continuity. It influences decisions, shapes how we interpret experiences, and guides our future choices. When this type of memory functions at an extreme level, the impact is not academic, it's existential. This difference also helps explain why people with hyperthymesia don't always perceive their condition as something extraordinary early in life. Many only realize they remember too much when they notice that other people can't access the past in the same way. While for them it's natural to remember exactly what they did years ago on an ordinary day, for most this is impossible. This shock of perception is part of the journey of discovering one's own mental workings. Another important point is that hyperthymesia does not involve conscious control over what is remembered. Unlike someone who trains memorization techniques, these people do not choose what to retain. The brain simply keeps the experiences accessible. This reinforces the idea that we are not dealing with a trainable skill or a classic intellectual talent, but with a unique neurological organization that operates behind the scenes of consciousness. By understanding this distinction, the audience undergoes a transformation in perception. What seemed like an intellectual superpower begins to reveal itself as a condition deeply connected to emotion, time, and identity. The discovery lies not in how intelligent someone with hyperthymesia is, but in how the human brain can function in radically different ways without this translating into traditional genius. This understanding also broadens the impact of the phenomenon. It makes us realize that intelligence, memory, and consciousness don't always go hand in hand in the way we imagine. Someone can remember almost their entire life and still face common difficulties, insecurities, and emotional challenges like anyone else. Hyperthymesia doesn't protect against suffering, nor does it guarantee success. It only changes how the past manifests in the present. By separating hyperthymesia from genius and photographic memory, we open up space for a more realistic and human view of the phenomenon. This helps us understand that the brain does not function in simple hierarchies, where more memory means more capacity or more value. It functions in complex systems, each with its specific impact on the experience of living. And the clearer this difference becomes, the more we begin to see hyperthymesia not as something to be idealized, but as a condition that reveals the limits, contrasts, and contradictions of the human mind. It invites us to question what it truly means to remember well, what it means to forget, and how these two forces shape our personal journey in ways we rarely consciously perceive. Write this down. This changed the way I see memory. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because everything that hyperthymesia reveals goes far beyond a rare and curious phenomenon. It exposes something we almost never question: how memory really works and the fundamental role of forgetting in the construction of our mental life. From an early age, we learn to treat forgetfulness as a failure, carelessness, or limitation. Forgetting a name, a date, or an important detail is usually seen as a sign of inattention or cognitive weakness. But hyperthymesia challenges this logic in a direct and unsettling way. When we observe people who can't forget, we realize that the human brain wasn't designed to retain everything indiscriminately. It was shaped to select, filter, reorganize, and, most importantly, discard information. Memory doesn't function like a static file, but like a living system, constantly transforming. Each memory we access undergoes adjustments, gains new meanings, and loses others. This process isn't a system error, it's the system itself in operation. Hyperthymesia shows what happens when this filtering mechanism doesn't function as usual. The brain continues to register, retain, and access experiences with extreme fidelity, but this comes with a significant emotional and cognitive impact. This leads us to a hidden truth: forgetting may be one of the most sophisticated functions of the human mind. It is forgetting that allows for adaptation, mindset change, and psychological growth throughout life's journey. From a scientific point of view, this makes perfect sense. The brain needs to conserve energy, reduce overload, and prevent old stimuli from excessively interfering with the present. If every past experience had the same emotional weight as when it occurred, life would be extremely difficult. Hyperthymesia offers us a kind of natural experiment that reveals the inner workings of this balance. It shows that remembering too much can be as challenging as remembering too little. This reflection connects directly to human behavior. Our decisions are influenced by memory but also by forgetting. We forget painful details to move forward, soften memories to preserve bonds, and reinterpret the past to maintain a coherent narrative about who we are. Memory doesn't exist merely to record facts, but to construct meaning. When this process loses flexibility, identity can become rigid, trapped in outdated versions of oneself. There is also a powerful philosophical dimension to this phenomenon. If we are, to a large extent, what we remember, then forgetting is also part of who we become. Forgetting allows for reinvention, transformation, and a change of perspective. It creates space for new experiences without everything being constantly compared to what has already been lived. Hyperthymesia forces us to question whether the pursuit of a perfect memory would really make sense in terms of emotional balance and mental freedom. In practice, what science is beginning to understand is that healthy memory is not the most accurate, but the most adaptable. A healthy brain is one that knows what to keep and what to let go. It doesn't erase everything, but it also doesn't keep everything accessible all the time. Hyperthymesia breaks this pattern and, in doing so, illuminates something essential about the human condition. Living requires a constant negotiation between remembering and forgetting. This understanding changes how we view memory lapses in everyday life. Those lapses that bother us so much may be signs of a system functioning correctly. They indicate that the brain is prioritizing, reorganizing, and protecting the mind from an excess of information and emotions. Hyperthymesia, on the other hand, shows what happens when this protection does not act as expected. There is also a direct impact on how we deal with time. For most people, the past gradually recedes into the distance, allowing the present to take up more space. For those with hyperthymesia, time seems less linear. The past remains close, influential, almost simultaneous. This alters the perception of one's own journey, making the flow of life denser and more emotionally charged. By connecting science, philosophy, and human behavior, hyperthymesia forces us to rethink deeply ingrained beliefs. Perhaps the brain's goal was never absolute precision, but emotional survival. Perhaps memory doesn't exist to make us walking archives of the past, but to help us navigate the present and project the future with flexibility. In this sense, forgetting is not losing something, it's making space. The more we reflect on this, the more we realize that human memory is less about facts and more about meaning. It shapes how we interpret experiences, how we react to the world, and how we construct our view of ourselves. Hyperthymesia exposes this mechanism in an extreme way, revealing that mental balance depends precisely on the imperfection of memory. And it is at this point that reflection begins to gain even greater depth, because when we understand that forgetting can be an essential function of the brain, we begin to question to what extent we want to completely control our minds and to what extent we need to trust the natural processes that shape our consciousness throughout life, opening up space to observe more attentively how this delicate balance manifests itself in different ways in each person. Comment below, that makes sense to me. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject because after all that hyperthymesia reveals about memory, identity, and emotional balance, the great mystery that troubles scientists and ordinary people naturally arises. Could something like this be developed, or are we facing an exclusively neurological condition, determined long before any conscious choice? This question is not just scientific curiosity, it directly touches our collective mindset, the way we perceive human potential, limits, and transformation. Science so far is quite cautious. There is no solid evidence that hyperthymesia can be learned or trained in the same way as traditional memorization techniques. People with this condition have not undergone specific methods, have not practiced deliberate mental exercises to remember more, and have not been exposed to unusual training. In many cases, they only realize they have something different when they compare their memories with those of other people. This reinforces the idea that we are dealing with a unique brain organization, possibly linked to genetic, neurological, and developmental factors. At the same time, the very existence of hyperthymesia provokes a powerful unease. If the human brain is capable of functioning in this way, even in very rare cases, it means that memory has a much greater potential than we normally access. What separates us from this type of functioning seems to be not just a lack of effort, but a complex set of mental filters that shape our daily experience. And these filters don't arise by chance. They exist because they fulfill a vital function. Some researchers are investigating whether people with hyperthymesia exhibit certain behavioral patterns from an early age, such as a natural tendency to revisit the past, constantly reflect on lived experiences, or mentally organize events from their own lives. This raises an intriguing hypothesis. Perhaps it is not possible to develop hyperthymesia itself, but it is possible to better understand how attention, emotion, and meaning influence what we remember. In this sense, the phenomenon does not offer an instruction manual, but a window into the inner workings of the human mind. There is also an important line of reflection here. Even if it were possible to train something similar, would that be desirable? After understanding the emotional impact of remembering everything, the question changes form. It is no longer, how can I remember more? But, how much do I really want to carry? Hyperthymesia forces us to confront a hidden truth. Not all potential needs to be explored if it compromises emotional balance and mental freedom. The human journey has always been marked by unconscious choices made by the brain itself. It decides what to highlight, what to downplay, and what to let disappear. This process influences decisions, relationships, and how we deal with mistakes and losses. If we radically altered this system, we wouldn't just be changing memory, but the entire structure of human experience. Identity, purpose, and even the perception of time would be profoundly impacted. On the other hand, studying hyperthymesia can yield valuable insights into areas such as mental health, trauma, and behavioral neuroscience. Understanding why some memories remain so vivid while others fade can help develop new approaches to dealing with traumatic memories, anxiety disorders, and even depression. In this sense, the phenomenon does not point to a path of imitation, but to a path of understanding. The big question, then, is perhaps not whether we can develop something similar, but what the existence of hyperthymesia teaches us about ourselves. It shows that the human brain is not a simple machine, adjustable only with training and discipline. It is a profoundly sensitive system, shaped to survive emotionally in a complex world. And any alteration in this balance can generate unexpected consequences. When we think about it, the final question takes on even more weight. If it were possible to remember everything, would you really want to? Or is what seems like a limitation today actually a silent protection that allows you to move forward, reinvent yourself, and transform your own story without being eternally trapped in what has already been lived? Hyperthymesia doesn't offer easy answers, but it provokes profound reflections on control, freedom, and the true role of memory in our journey. And the more you think about it, the more you realize that this mystery isn't just in the brains of a very few rare people, but in the workings of the human mind as a whole, which balances remembering and forgetting in ways we are still far from fully understanding. Comment below, That question won't leave my head. If you've made it this far, it's because this topic resonated with you on some level. Perhaps it sparked curiosity, perhaps it caused discomfort, perhaps it made you rethink how your own memory works. If this message reached you, it's worth recording. Write a simple sentence in the comments, something like, "This message was for me," just so I know you walked with me to the end of this reflection. If at any point you felt a connection with this conversation, leaving a like is a simple way to show it. It helps this content continue to find people who also enjoy exploring the mysteries of the human mind in more depth and less superficially. It's a small gesture, but it makes a real difference. If this type of content resonates with you, subscribing to the channel is the most natural way to continue this journey. The idea here is always to go beyond the obvious, connecting science, behavior, and reflection in a human way, without rushing and without easy answers. If this interests you, you already know where to find me. And before you go, there's a video here that perfectly complements this topic. It expands on this conversation from another angle and delves even deeper into some of the ideas that came up here. Click and continue reading there.